Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Soundrise podcast. Today, I think we're in for a very interesting episode as we're talking about the 90s new metal pioneers, Korn. Hello, Alexander. How are you today?
Hello, Vlada. Hello, guys. I'm great. I've been thinking recently a lot about the fact that this is a typical time of the year where when a lot of music festivals and events take place. So I'm really kind of having that strange feeling that nothing is actually taking place nowadays, and I'm really curious to know how our listeners and also you, Vlada, take this. Do you also feel strange?
Well, I really miss live shows and I can't wait for all these bands to be lifted and to be able to enjoy live music again. But right now, we all have to be responsible, so we have to be a bit patient for the sake of humanity.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well said. So today's band is, as you said, Korn, the new metal pioneers, one of the probably most well-known acts from the 90s. And now I'm gonna give you a little introduction of this band. So this band was formed in 1993 in California. It was formed by members of the previously funk metal band called LAPD, and I'm not really surprised that it was a funk metal band because it featured the bassist Fieldy, and you can, if you're a fan of Korn, if you have listened to some of their records, you can sense a little bit of funk there, especially because Fieldy, the Korn bassist, tends to slap the bass a lot. Um, the next thing that I want to say is that they have been really consistent with their personnel. So from 1993 onwards, they have only replaced one drummer, which was David Silveria. He left in 2006, and now they have the drummer called Ray Luzier. The rest of the personnel are basically the same, and it's really interesting that they have also their nicknames. So the bass player has the nickname Fieldy. The guitarists have nicknames Monkey and Head. But the vocalist, the famous vocalist, decided to keep his original name, Jonathan Davis. So this band gained first mainstream success when they released their album "Follow the Leader" in 1988, and the follow-up called "Issues" in 1999. Their debut album, their self-titled debut album, was released in 1994, though, and this band is really known for introducing this new type of metal music, which is kind of different from the typical heavy metal from the 70s and the 80s. So this was something that marked a new era for metal music, and I kind of feel that a lot of metal fans are split when it comes to their taste. Um, this band has released 13 albums so far, and they have also been associated with some famous record labels like Elektra and Virgin. And finally, I want to say that this band cites Red Hot Chili Peppers and Faith No More as their biggest influences, among other bands, of course. So that's something about Korn, and I now want to quickly share um, my personal background story with this band, because I was the one that chose this band for this episode. This is actually my first metal band, the first metal song, or probably one of the first metal song that I've ever heard. I can't really recall the first one. It was their cover of the famous song "Word Up," and I really liked it. I still do, and the video for that, the music video for that song is really funny because it features a video where the band members are pictured as dogs. So they have dog bodies, but their heads are their, let's say, natural heads. Their original faces are instead of dog faces. So, dear listeners, if you want some fun, go over and watch that clip. So, the records that we're gonna talk about today are there are two big records, Follow the Leader and Issue, that I have already mentioned. So we decided to kind of mix things up a bit. We usually start our discussion with the band's debut album, but now we want to start with their two big albums and their latest release, called The Nothing, which was released last year, uh, 2019. So, Vlada, I want to ask you now, what was your take, and how did you like the record Follow the Leader?
Well, I have to say, before I get into any details, that I'm not a huge fan of new metal. I could never ever get into any band that preferred that style of music. And when I was a teenager, I had an utter dislike for Korn and other bands of this back then new metal genre that seemed crude and less sophisticated compared to what came before. So I have to say that I may be slightly biased when talking about this kind of band, but I did my best to listen to these records with an open ear and an open heart. So I have to say, I had a very hard time getting through Follow the Leader. I know it's considered a new metal classic, but for me it was quite a chore to listen to these songs. Now, there are some positives. First of all, I kind of like the way this band builds the atmosphere. They always have some kind of creepy, spooky sounds in the background, very cool intros. I like that. That gives you a feeling that there's more to this than just plain music, that there's a certain concept, that there's a certain artistry involved. But I still thought that this record was overall underwhelming. Most of the songs kind of had the same feel to them. There wasn't much diversity. The lyrics I thought were mostly about personal struggles. They were very self deprecating. And while I really appreciate the fact that Jonathan Davis uses music as a form of catharsis for himself, I just couldn't get into this, especially given the fact that all the songs kind of shared the same sentiment. There was a certain lack of diversity again when it came to the emotional resonance of this music. So I can understand how it might appeal to somebody who fully identifies with these lyrics, with this music. But if you don't, then it might be very difficult to actually appreciate the record. The big song here is Freak on a Leash. I can see why this was a major hit. It, it's a very catchy tune, but to be honest, again, it didn't really do much for me. And then there's another song I would like to point out, but for all the negative things, and that's All in the Family, which seems to be some kind of diss track against Limp Bizkit, which was another one of my hated bands back in my teenage days. And I have to say, though, that Korn to me seems to be a way more serious band, a way more ambitious band than Limp Bizkit. So I would say that. But what I really dislike about this song is very homophobic lyrics that just seem super cringy nowadays and completely outdated, and just uh, everything seems to be in very poor taste. What do you, Alexander, think about this?
Okay, I'm on a quite opposite side. I can't say that I was impressed with this album. I think that they have better albums than this one. I can kind of understand why it was so big, and also it was featured on the Billboard 200 list. It was kind of okay. No big, no huge feelings from my side. It has some nice tracks. My gripe with this album is that the other half kind of fades away in terms of quality. The first half is quite good, especially the songs "Freak on a Leash" and "Got the Life." Those were some of my, let's say, first and initial um, songs when I started discovering Korn, way before this episode actually. So yeah, it was okay. I mean, I would probably go back to it. I totally get um, the controversial lyrics in All in the Family. That's something that also caught my attention when I listened to it. So not a positive, so to say.
Very
Uh,
cringeworthy, right? Very cringeworthy.
it was kind of, I don't know. When I heard it, I was like, "What is this? Like, this is not something that I saw happen that I saw happening." So very weird. And but I have to praise. On the other hand, I have to praise uh, the fifth track, "Children of the Corn," featuring Ice Cube. I think Ice Cube really was a nice fit, and it is something that characterizes new metal. They also incorporate rap influences, which is okay in some cases, and I say that because I'm not a rap fan, but in this case, it was a nice match, so to say.
I agree
Um,
about that. I really like the inclusion of Ice Cube. I think that might be one of the highlights of this record that I found so tedious to get through, but I kind of liked hearing Ice Cube there.
Absolutely, yeah. And you mentioned the Limp Bizkit and other new metal bands. I will also add Linkin Park and Slipknot. For some reason, I just don't like those bands, but Korn seemed to be way ahead of them. So that's really weird. Maybe because they were the pioneers of this subculture. Like, for example, when we talk heavy metal, um, I really like Black Sabbath better than the bands that would come after them. So maybe sometimes the root band, the original, the pioneer, is better than its successor. So dear listeners, please tell me, do you have the same impression? Doesn't matter whether it's metal or some other type of music. Do you feel that the original bands of a certain genre or subgenre are better because they were the first ones to actually play that way? They were the inventors, so to say. All right, Vlada, I think we have covered everything about this record. Let's now jump straight to our ratings and favorite tracks, if you have any. My standout track here is "Got the Life," especially because the bass line is good. I mean, the bass is something that's a clear standout with this band. I really like Fieldy's work. It's funky, it's slappy. It also has some um, sharp sounds, so really powerful. And he
I
he
don't know,
is
man. I don't know. The rhythm section is all right, but the whole thing just I'm just very very unenthusiastic about all this.
you're a hater. We all know that. um, Fieldy is a famous Ibanez player, so that's nice to hear. That's a brand of guitars and bass guitars that's famous for producing metal instruments or instruments tailored for making that sharp metal sound. Okay, "Got Life" is my standout track, and my rating is um, I'll go with 6.5. How about you, Vlada?
Wow, now that's a high rating there. Okay, so I'll be very honest here. As I said, I may have some bias, but I really tried. I paid attention to the lyrics, to the music. Having said that, it's extremely difficult for me to actually choose the highlight here because I didn't like any of the songs. Okay,
So no standout tracks for you. That's fine.
maybe Freak on the Leash just because it's kind of catchy and I don't know, it just seems alright compared to some other tracks. What was the track where Ice Cube is featured?
Oh, it was the fifth track called Children of the Corn.
Okay, that wasn't too bad either. So I guess those two, Freak on the Leash, and as far as ratings are concerned, I know that some of you Korn fans will not forgive me this. I'm really sorry, but I'll give this record 2.5.
Oof, that is horrendous.
It is what it is. It's just the way I feel about this album. I don't think this album can grow on me. I find it extremely difficult to actually listen to Korn. I can recognize some of their talent. I think that they are good musicians, especially the rhythm section. But there's just something that feels amiss here. Not enough diversity. Everything seems to boil down to the same kind of mood, to the same type of lyrics. So, yes, definitely 2.5.
Really, really disappointing, Vlada. Oh my god. Okay. Right, so moving on to the follow up, which is called Issues, released in 1999. And I have to say that I really like this album. First of all, something that I like about Korn in general that Vlada mentioned in this episode is the fact that they often incorporate these spooky, creepy sounds, and that's what I really like about him. And that's something that really goes well, really kind of matches Jonathan's vocals. So I find that authentic and really interesting. And what I also like about this album is, first of all, the album cover, and second, I like those parts of the songs where the guitar just plays a couple of notes in the background while Jonathan raps and kind of keeps the rhythm going along with the rhythm section. So I don't know how these two albums, Issues and obviously Follow the Leader, I don't know how they are considered to be, you know, equally good. I think this is clearly an upgrade, and again, I really enjoyed this album. What about you, Vlada?
I have to agree with you here. I think this is definitely a huge upgrade. Some of the things that irritated me on the previous record are kind of gone, at least to a certain degree. I feel that the songs are much more rich in flavor. There's more diversity, better riffs. I really enjoyed some of the riffs. Have to say, again, I have to commend them on their ability to create atmosphere, which is even more evident here than on the previous record, especially in songs like Falling Away, which has a very creepy atmosphere. Um,
Falling Away from Me.
yeah, Falling Away from Me. There's still this typical self deprecating lyrical content, for better or worse. However, I think there are some songs where I really enjoy. Well, if you can use the word enjoy in this context, but I really appreciate the way how personal he gets with the lyrics, the way he gets all introspective and he gets, he's bearing his soul to the audience, and that's something to appreciate, even if you may not necessarily enjoy the musical content. One of such songs is Hey Daddy, and I think if I'm familiar with this, Jonathan Davis had problems as a child. He was unfortunately sexually abused, and this is the song that talks about this and talks about the mistrust that existed between him and his parents, who wouldn't believe him when he warned them about being molested by a member of an extended family. So I really appreciate that kind of content. I think that's what sets Korn out from all these other new metal bands that are more about just having fun and parting. Korn is a more serious band in that sense, and that's something to be celebrated. On the
Yeah.
other hand, again, I have to say this is not necessarily my cup of tea. Um, Again, the same criticism that I had for the first record that we listened to is that a lot of songs are kind of uniform in terms of the sentiments that they cover, and after a while it just gets very boring and very difficult to keep up with the record. Having said that, I do think that the record kind of picks up near the end, especially with songs such as
Counting.
Counting. Yes, that one. Counting. I really enjoy that song. I think it might be the best track on the record. And also Dirty, a 7 minutes, 50 seconds long song. However, it's not really that long. They have like 3 or 4 minutes of white noise tacked to the end, which I don't know, is some kind of gimmicky stuff. I think a lot of stuff that they do does boil down to gimmicks, which is probably what made them quite popular with people as well. Sometimes these gimmicks work, sometimes they seem a bit forced, like they're trying too hard to be edgy. So overall, an improvement over the previous record. There are good things to point out here, but at the end, it does sound a bit contrived. It does sound a bit uh, gimmicky at times, or too uniform. So I still have a lot of reservations about it.
Yes, Vlada, I definitely agree with you on that. Um, that you said that this is an upgrade, and definitely is. I'm sorry, guys, for being predictable, but my standout track is falling away from me. But obviously, the rest of the album is, in my opinion, worth listening to. Apart, um, apart from this album, well, not apart from this album. Sorry, just lost my mind in there. What I want to say about this band in general is that I like their visual identity. You know, these dreadlocks, these tattoos, they kind of look, down to earth, like those cool guys. Obviously, they remind you of the late 90s and early 2000s. I kind of like that, but I still find it weird that the rest of those popular new metal bands like Slipknot or Limp Bizkit or Linkin Park, they just differ from for some reason. I don't know why. And I also like Korn's logo, with that weird R in there.
It's not a weird R. It exists in Russian and in some other languages, and it's
Yes, I
it's
know.
it's read as ya, right? As ya. So how Korn came across it, I don't know, but it's a bit weird.
So you agree with me that it is weird, right?
Yeah,
Um,
but if you ask me, as far as as far as their visual identity is concerned, I think that it's kind of made to appeal to angsty teenagers. So I just don't see anything particularly moving about it. It's all I like the cartoonish aesthetics that they have, but it just seems a bit forced to me. Those album covers, I don't find them particularly attractive in any way. I once knew a guy who had several of these covers tattooed all across his body in full color. I think that speaks a lot about how faithful some of the Korn fans are, and perhaps this music being so uh, confessional and introspective really appeals to certain people. They can really identify with it and identify with it quite strongly. But if you don't identify with it so strongly, then it may all seem a bit too, as I already pointed out, contrived and too forced.
Fair points, Vlada. All right. So let's do our ratings, and Vlada, you can tell me first your standout track.
Okay, so my standout track is Counting. Even though I have to say there were some other cool tracks, relatively speaking. Back for Me had a nice doom metal like riff, for example. Overall, not a bad record. Still not my cup of tea, so I'll give it 4.5. So listenable, but I just can't get into this.
Oh God. Yeah. Okay, so my standout track is Falling Away from Me. Again, sorry for being predictable, guys. If you wanna know more about this album, I encourage you to listen to it fully. And my rating is 8 out of 10. So let's now move on to their latest release from 2019 called The Nothing. So Vlada, hit me with your thoughts. I hope this one sounded better to you. I'm just trying to kind of be positive here and optimistic. So go
Well,
on.
you can be positive as much as you want. That won't sway me in any way. So I have to say this was an absolutely atrocious and horrible record that should be buried 6 feet deep underground and never dug out for the entire history of humankind.
Oh God.
No, I'm just joking. Actually, this record is a huge improvement. I really enjoyed this, I have to say. Uh, for
You
the
triggered me. Come on.
Yes, so I have to say, now this was done recently, and to me it sounds like Jonathan Davis and the rest of the band really reached maturity as writers, as musicians, and it shows in a great way. So this is definitely a record I can get behind. Definitely something that while I may not listen to consistently, I can freely say is a good record that deserves to be listened to, that may appeal to a great number of people who may not have listened to Korn before. Now, all the usual staples of their sound are still present, but I just think that the band sounds uh, much more visceral than on the previous records. The lyrics are better. The singing is much more powerful and intense. There's a there's great dynamics to the way he sings, the way he switches from one voice to another. So those are all really really good things that I have to say about this. Um, Atmosphere again, they brought it up a notch. I love the atmosphere on this one as well. Um, you know what? There were some parts on this record that kind of reminded me of Soundgarden. You know, these kind of
Ooh.
choruses that, like they had very melodic choruses and very powerful, intense choruses. And I think Korn, in some ways, did something similar here. I'm not saying it sounds exactly like Soundgarden, but it's what reminded me of. It does get a bit tiring after a while, but not because the songs are necessarily bad. It's more because, just like the previous records, sometimes it feels a bit like too much of the same thing. But overall, a definite improvement. As for the tracks, let me think. There are a few really good tracks here.
Definitely.
This Loss, I really like that one near the end. And this song is very emotional and very personal because while reading about the background of this album, I discovered that this was recorded shortly after Jonathan Davis' wife passed away. So, knowing the tragic circumstances in which this record is made, one has to say that he really tries his best to express his sense of loss, grief, and despair, and he does it really well. And I think while this is absolutely a tragedy, this record is stronger for it because it really bears that personal touch. And while on the previous records he was trying to be personal and he was trying to instill his emotional burden into the music, here he really succeeds in doing that. And that's why I think this might be the band's best record overall. What's your take, Alexander?
Vlada, thank you very much. Humanity is safe now that you actually gave some positive comments about Korn and this album. So this album to me is a pleasant surprise. I have to be honest. A lot of nice tracks. This is something that I would listen to while doing some physical work and maybe working out or something and driving and so on, which means that it is energetic and it really boosts that adrenaline in you. That's something that I like about Korn, and this album absolutely describes that atmosphere and that sort of feel that they give you. So it was a really nice listen, especially the first half of the album. Even though um, I don't want to kind of undermine the rest of the album. So yeah, really, it was really nice listening to it, especially if you want to boost that energy. I have to say that I have an acquaintance that listened to that watched actually Korn live a few years back, and for some reason he thought that they weren't good at making an atmosphere, that they weren't up for it. So that's really weird, I would say. But if we look at this album, it is definitely something that if you're looking for something to kind of make you mad but in a good way, uh, go over and check this album out. That's my comment here. And regarding the singing, I have to slightly disagree with you, Vlada, here, because I thought that the singing, the vocals actually were remixed in a, I don't know, in a digital way, uh, which kind of put his vocal abilities down. Not much, but it was noticeable if you compare this album to the older ones. I'm not saying that's a big negative, but just a thought from my side. But overall, as I said, a positive surprise, so to say. So Vlada, having said this, can you give me your rating and your favorite track?
All right, so rating, I would say 6.5. A good record. The band is much more mature here. The songs also pack up more punch. There are all these nice transitions into choruses, and quite catchy at times, also very atmospheric. Basically, all those things that you found in the other records are amplified here for the better results. So they work much better. It seems like they were trying to do certain things and almost, I don't want to say failed, but maybe in my opinion they failed. But now with this record they finally succeeded. So definitely 6.5. The best track is This Loss, because I think it's very emotional, melancholy, a lot of grieving that you can sense there. It's real, it's genuine. So a very nice surprise for me.
Great. Oh, finally. um, I want to say before I give you my rating and my favorite track, I want to say that some of these tracks remind me also of other genres. I think there is one track that really reminds me of a synth pop band. that was formed recently, like a couple of years ago. And funnily enough, the debut album of that synthpop band is featured in our top 10 covers lists. So, dear listeners, go over if you want to check this out. Go over, check our Instagram and Facebook pages, and take a look, and you might get an idea who I'm talking about. So definitely you can sense, actually you can hear other influences. But back to giving my rating. My rating for this album is 7.5, and the standout track is called Cold. It is the second track, but I have to say there are more tracks that are definitely worth listening to. Yeah. All right, Vlada. So what is your final word regarding this band? You know, when we kind of sum up all our reviews and impressions, what's your final take and your message to our listeners?
Uh, well, my take, I don't want to sound too cruel, but to me, this sound that was created in the 90s and that ruled the radio waves in the mid and late 90s seems rather crude, seems rather uh, too simple compared to the previous metal generation, especially the 80s metal bands. And I think Korn might be the best example of this music because they seem to show more ambition than most of these bands, and their musicianship was pretty good. But overall, I just feel most of new metal is outdated now, and there's a good reason why it's kind of relegated to the history. But Korn is one of the few bands that actually still makes sense, so that's a huge redeeming factor. And I challenge our listeners to give them a listen, even if they're prejudiced a bit, just like I was, especially the last record. They may still find something to enjoy.
Okay, fair points, Vlada. Thank you for that. So, dear listeners, take note and try not to be that prejudiced like Vlada. That's my final word. If you're not a metal purist, like some people are, you should definitely check this out. I can't really recommend listening to other new metal bands. That's my personal, I don't know, my personal impression, but Korn is definitely worth listening to. I can see myself going back to these albums, and I'm certainly looking forward to that. All right, now, dear listeners, thank you so much for listening to our show yet again. I hope you like the recent updates and the recent um, news on our Facebook, Instagram, Patreon, and Twitter pages. We recently released, for the first time ever, a musician interview. So I hope that you like that. And if you want to stay updated with all the things surrounding this show, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And if you want to support our show, feel free to become a patron. We have a lot of perks for each level, for each type of patron. So check that out. Feel free to give us any kind of feedback. And now we're giving the microphone to our friends at PodRev Day. So please spare a minute to to listen to what they have to say. Till the next week, stay safe and see you soon.
Take care.
Write a review, and then you can share it.
With the world.
In any social media platform.
And then your friends see it, and you can share and discover new shows together.
This is Steph, instigator of Pod Rev Day, Podcast Review Day.
And I'm Andy from Inspired Money.
And I'm Ariel of Earbuds Podcast Collective and Castbox.
We're here to tell you everything you need to know about Pod Rev Day,
which is on the 8th of every month, of every year, of every century, of every, you get it.
We are posting podcast reviews as part of hashtag PodRevDay, Podcast Review Day.
Because podcasters work their butts off and deserve to know how much they've impacted your lives. And you can do that through reviews.
Even 1 star feels surprisingly good.
Does
It
it?
lets you know that people are at least listening.
Don't be a passive podcast listener. Write a review and tell your favorite creator what you love about their podcast or about a specific episode.
And to participate, you just need to do one review.
And we'll see you every 8th of the month.
PodRev Day, because podcasters deserve to hear it.
Hashtag
PodRevDay. PodRevDay.